Welcome back to the Geelong Region Soccer Show. It is episode 62, and joining us here, well, very, very shortly, Steve, is our next guest. Would you like to introduce him?
Yeah, we've got him on the line now, I believe, and it's the City of Greater Geelong Councillor for the Brown Bill Ward. It's Mr. EDDY KONTELJ, and there he is on the right of your picture there. Good evening, Eddie. How you going?
Good evening, Stephen and Tonci. Lovely to see you, and thanks for having me once again.
Eddie, always a pleasure having you on because you are a real soccer counsellor. We like to call you soccer counsellor, a real friend of every club, particularly here in the northern suburbs. But mate, I guess it's something that's we were just speaking now to Pete Bradley from Western United, who's also involved with the country junior championships, and that's going to be fantastic for the region and indeed for the sport, particularly in the northern suburbs with games at Stead Park and at Myers Reserve, two wonderful community facilities. But we sorely miss a regional facility, something that Ballarat seems to have, Shepparton seems to have, Bendigo seems to have, but we here in Geelong don't as yet have. Where are we at with regards to that?
Tonci, the time is now, isn't it? The time is now. In fact, look, we've been talking about this for some time, as you know, Tonci. In fact, we're probably talking about it for the last 6 or 7 years. But it wasn't until probably Councillor Kylie Grzybek joined us on council that I was able to really get some strong support for this initiative. It's plain to see that with the growth of soccer in Geelong, and also our desire to attract major soccer events to our region, that a regional facility is absolutely paramount. And I suppose why I say the time is now because, one, we have some money in the budget to develop at least a charter and a plan to put us in a position to then seek additional funding, whatever that may be, from state and federal level. And we know we've got 2 elections coming up, in the next 12 to 15 months. So it's really important that we get this right now, and that we're on the front foot as these elections come to us.
Now, Eddie, you mentioned yourself and Kylie both very on board for this. What's the feeling amongst the other councillors? Obviously, it's an important issue, and we don't want our young children missing out on the opportunity to play sport, which we're going to talk about a little bit later in the show as well, which can be a problem with our facility situation. Is it possible that we can get all the councillors on board but get behind this?
Oh, I think so. Look, by nature, I've been a councillor now for nearly 11 years. You find that council is supportive of sporting initiatives. And as such, I've seen pretty good progress made in a lot of sporting facilities over the years. And they do have an appreciation for the growth of soccer in our backyard. Now, of course, as it comes to to those times where we need to start to make decisions around real significant funding, that will take some justification. But I believe that councillors will be supportive of this initiative.
Now, we're watching some footage of the brilliant regional facility or sub-regional facility in Ballarat. And to think this has been around now for 5, 6 or so years since the NPL first started. And with all due respect to Ballarat, but Ballarat's football scene is nowhere near that of Geelong's, yet they've got an amazing facility. Now, you and Councillor Grzybek have on a few occasions travelled up the Midland Highway, checked this place out. Have you got any ideas? Have you got any sort of feedback from the Ballarat folk how to best go about lobbying and ensuring that we can get a facility just as good, if not better than this one?
Yeah, sure. Look, they've been really open with us in terms of giving us access to the entire facility. As you've said, they've taken us right through. We met with the mayor of the time when this was actually awarded. So he was really in tune with how they went about lobbying and also advocating for a facility such of this nature. So our step from this point forward was we've got a small amount of money in the budget. As Kylie and I said during the election, if we were re-elected, this would be one of our priorities, and now we're starting to get some rubber to the road. What we want to put together really is a stakeholder or advisory group that is able to guide us, and then create a charter and a plan for identifying, I guess, a number of things. One is what size facility do we need? You know, what size stadium? How many pitches do we need? You know, how much room do we need for future development? What do we want at the facility? What kind of a hub do we want? Do we want it from, you know, children's soccer all the way to A-League? Do we want it near public transport? Do we want a centre of excellence? All of those things need to be thought of. Once we know what we essentially would like in a utopia, then we need to find location and land. And from that point, we can really start to then lobby for funding. Now, if we've got utopia and that's not achievable, we can always scale back. But I think we need to put into the framework everything that we would like to try to achieve from a facility like this. If it's not achievable immediately, at least have the land mass that allows it to grow for generations to come, and for our children to be able to develop it further if they need to.
Now, Eddie, what's a likely funding model that we might see for this? We're looking like local, state and federal to get this over the line, given it would cost like a substantial amount of money, maybe something like up to 50 million in total, possibly.
Yes, potentially all of that. I really don't want to leave anything on the table here, but essentially you would see, I imagine, local and state at the very least. But, you know, you could look at different models too. You know, does it actually have to be owned by a council? Does it have to be owned by the state? At the end of the day, what we're looking for is an outcome. And that, how that comes about doesn't necessarily have to be government owned. So I'm certainly open in my thinking in how we actually achieve obtaining the funding to build this, because what we want to do is not be talking about this in a decade's time.
Yeah.
We want to be taking advantage of the next few years to make this a reality in terms of funding and sign-off.
Eddie, you did mention ownership there, and obviously you're talking about ownership of the facility, but let's go one step back to first base and talk about ownership of this concept. Who needs to take the bull by the horns, and as far as this plan or as far as this concept, making it a reality? Is it the City of Greater Geelong? Is it the Football Federation Victoria, Geelong Region Football Committee? Is it a major club like Western United? Or is it as you say, is it a sort of a mixture of all of that, like a task force? But then ultimately, who's actually going to take the most accountability and the most ownership?
Well, clearly now, other than Council, Kylie and I, no one is. So we have to now take this bull by the horns to drive this. Going forward, as we establish the needs, then, of course, there may be others that need to sort of take more of a lead role, depending on where we're at with, you know, phasing, funding, and then development. But right here, right now, in this void, in the absence of anyone else grabbing this and running with it, I can assure you that Councillor Grzybek and I will be at the front end of it.
Brilliant. Great to hear.
Now, with regard to that $50,000 funding for the business case for the regional football facility that we heard about around this time last year, where does that stand at the moment?
So at the moment, it's really sitting there waiting for us to utilise that. And so, as I said before, Stephen, this is, and the 50,000 is a very small amount, as we know, and we will need more funding probably to develop the planning of this. But this gets the conversation at the front end and allows us to at least put a straw man together, a plan of potentially what this venue could look like. It enables us then to start, you know, to, I suppose, I won't call it a prospectus because it probably won't be at that stage, but at least gives us a solid plan of what we want to do going forward and allows us to really start to engage with other government departments.
Yeah. Now, I mean, Eddie, there definitely is a demand for it. If we look at it just here in the short term, we've got an FFA Cup game coming up that North Geelong are playing possibly on their second pitch because they don't have the adequate lighting on their main pitch. We've got Geelong Soccer Club hosting Preston Lions in what is being anticipated as a possibly a 1,500, 2,000 crowd this Saturday at Stead Park. I don't think Stead Park can hold that many. And then we talked about the Country Championships Cup coming up in a few weeks' time, being split over two venues. Not to mention the Australian-Croatian tournament, which has been transferred to Queensland simply because there wasn't a facility big enough in Geelong to cater for it. So the demand is definitely there. Now, how do we go about getting a dream into a reality? We talked about this first step about getting this business plan. Is it likely now that yourself and Councillor Kontele are going to call a general meeting, or are you going to look at headhunting particular type of persons or organisations? What's the next step, the next concrete step, I guess?
Yeah, so I guess I don't want to start naming too many organisations and too many individuals here, because we clearly need to approach them. But I think I think you guys know better than I do, some of the organisations that at least need to be involved. And then, of course, we need some subject matter experts. And then as that progresses, we will need state representation as well. So, yes, the demand is definitely there, Tonci, and probably has been, to be quite honest, for about a decade and more.
Absolutely.
But what I have found, Tonci, particularly during the election, when we sort of announced, Kylie and I announced that we were going to sort of spearhead this. And you might remember we had a photo, and there was a lot of representatives from a lot of clubs there. And what I found in the last 10 years is, early days when we were talking about this, clubs were a bit concerned about, well, hang on, if we put funding into a regional facility, what happens to our facilities? Does that mean we miss out? And clearly we've demonstrated that's not the case, because you look at the millions that we've now invested in local clubs over the last 10 years. But now they're saying we do need this, because we need this to spill over. We need it to develop our younger teams. We need it for major sporting events such as the Croatian tournament. So we've got a lot more people now that are starting to encourage us to do this, and I think we'll have really good support from the soccer fraternity in Geelong. And we know when Geelong gets behind something, we're very, very successful in being able to deliver it.
Now, that's not a photo of the masked Avengers or anything like that. That is actually a kind of a COVID photo of we've got Geelong, North Geelong, Western United, Bell Park, and Corio Soccer Club represented there. So as you can see from that photo, yeah, there is definitely a lot of support with the clubs. But Steve, any last questions for our guest tonight?
I guess just as a last one, like, what can we do to get the football community on board and teamed up and all united for this? Is that the goal we should be aiming for, to get everyone behind it, everyone working together and pushing it along?
That's a really good question, Steve. Thanks for asking. I reckon we are going to need your support. We are going to need the community's support. Make no bones about it. Getting $30 to $50 million is not a simple task. So we are going to need the soccer voice to be as united as we possibly can be, and really strong and loud in voice that, hey, this is something that we want and need, and we're behind the council in developing the right facility.
I guess one last question I've just remembered now, the G21 soccer strategy that was, I think it's probably outdated now. It was always going to be updated, but I guess it hasn't really been, as far as I know, updated. Is now a good time, because we did see something in the press today in the Geelong Advertiser about AFL grounds and netball grounds and the best grounds and the worst grounds and yada yada. I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in our sport. Is it time that on one hand we talk about this regional facility, but also on another hand we start to update our regional soccer strategy? Because our next guest, Mick Parker from Armstrong United, he was telling me off air some very, very interesting things about just the future development and how everything sort of seems to be skewed towards AFL grounds and the development of AFL grounds at the expense of football, as in soccer grounds. So, and that's obviously happening down south, and I'm sure similarly it'd probably be happening with the Lovely Banks growth area. Do we need to act on that now before it gets too late and we miss the boat with regards to that?
Yeah, so we've already started to discuss that. That's absolutely right, Tonci. That G21 soccer strategy, which was actually never adopted by council, I think I've told you that on the show before. Yep. We only noted it. And that was the reason that it was never adopted is, in fact, at the time, many of the local soccer clubs weren't in support of what was being advocated for. So I do think now it's time to pull that back out, refresh it, and the regional soccer facility needs to be part of that. Absolutely.
Absolutely. Brilliant news, and hopefully we're going to see some big news and big movements in that space. So, Eddie, thank you for joining us pretty much at such short notice, and we really appreciate your input into the show and your continuing support. Really appreciate it, and I think on behalf of all the clubs, we can honestly say thank you for everything that you and Councillor Grzybek have done and continue to do. And let's get this one over the line, because this is something that would be a legacy, not just for our children, but for our children's children.
Well, thank you, guys. And you'd be wrapped, I imagine, with the $2.8 million going into Corio and the 1.8 going into Leopold and the new lights going into Bell Park and the new lights going into Myers Reserve and the master plan for the Myers Reserve facility and the new car park and driveway into Myers Reserve and the fence around pitch 3 at Hume Reserve. You'd be wrapped, wouldn't you? Wrapped.
Yeah, we're hard to please, aren't we, Steve?
We celebrate the little victories.
I come bearing gifts.
And you forgot the $50,000 for the business case for a regional soccer facility, which would be the absolute icing on the cake. Eddie, thank you very much for joining us. Much appreciated, and all the very best to you.
Thanks for your support. I appreciate it too.
Thanks, that's Councillor EDDY KONTELJ joining us, the City of Greater Geelong Councillor. Look, such an important discussion, Steve, and it's so good to hear, in fact, that the general feeling as well is that the clubs are sort of, at least what Councillor KONTELJ is telling us, are starting to see the bigger picture, starting to paddle in the same direction almost, but that's hard enough, because we are such a fractured fraternity, so to speak, the football community. Sometimes our infighting is our worst enemy. We don't need AFL or any other sport. We sometimes do it to ourselves, but maybe the tide is turning.
I think it has to be. I think there's a united front there. Just the level of interest that you can see in the facility is there for all to see from all parts of the football community in Geelong. So